Hi, this is Andy. I'd like you to think of two people. Okay. So the first is someone in your personal life, maybe a relative or friend, or at least someone who used to be a friend. And can you think of someone that you just don't look forward to seeing anymore? I mean, maybe dread the thought of having them around. Maybe it's because of their outspoken political views or how they navigated issues around COVID. You see a social media post from them, and it just, once again, makes your blood boil. Anyone come to mind for that one? The second person I'd like you to think of is someone in your work life. There's a divide between you and them as well. And it could be for similar reasons, like maybe the way they rail about a social cause you think differently about, or could be difference in how things should be done at work. Perhaps every problem is solved with agile and you think they're oversimplifying things and it's creating a divide. Don't let this be a passive exercise. Think of examples of where there are divides in your life today because we're having an important discussion about how to have fearlessly curious conversations in dangerously divided times. That's actually the subtitle of Monica Guzman's book. Monica joins us to talk about her deeply insightful book, I Never Thought of It That Way. If you've felt the strain or even been dumped because of ideological differences, whether at work or life beyond, Monica's book is an important and timely read for us all. If you feel the polarization in culture and in the workplace are just too daunting to do anything about, well, Monica's book is packed with practical ideas that you can start implementing right away. And this remarkable woman is on a mission to help us address the divides in our life. She's been making a difference. I consider this a must read book and can't wait to introduce some of the ideas in today's discussion. Hey, quick note, if you've listened for a while, you've heard me talk about our e-learning program entitled Getting Stuff Done, Project Management for Students. The feedback from the program has been fantastic, but here's what I want you to know. We have radically reduced the price to just $49 US. We want to make it available to as many people as possible without cost being an issue. So if you have a high school or college age student in your life and want to invest in their ability to lead and deliver, you can do that now for even a better price. So give them a head start to more confidently lead and deliver. Learn more and get a copy for them at peopleandprojectspodcast.com/getting stuff done. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Monica about her book, I Never Thought of It That Way. Monica, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. Before we get into the book, I'd love for our listeners to learn more about you because you talk a lot in the book about the fact that you share different political beliefs from your parents. And yet, to the surprise of many, you still have rich and involved relationships with them. But honestly, I'd like to go further back than that. Before your family came to the US, I'm talking about young Monty here, okay? Can you think of any ways that your family culture or early experiences formed how you think about bridging divides?
Wow. So I moved to the States when I was 6 years old. So if I think all the way back, so I remember when I was very young, I lived in northern Mexico and it snowed. It never snowed. And I remember going outside and crying because the assumptions I had about snow turned out to be wrong.
Mm,
I thought snow was just pieces of cloud. And I thought cloud was fluffy, cottony stuff.
mm, mm.
Didn't think it was cold, didn't think it was wet, didn't think it would hurt to hold for too long, and I was disappointed. So anyway, that memory came right up when you talked about being that young. But as far as bridging divides, what I remember deeply about that time in my life was my family culture beyond my parents and my
Yeah.
brother. It's in Mexico and in our family, it was a very, very close extended family.
Mhm.
Always hanging out with the grandparents, the aunts. I have tons of cousins. They're always running around. And I would hear my aunts on one side, it's five daughters. My mom is one of five daughters. And just hearing them like the drama and the gossip and the laughter followed by yelling and then back to laughter followed by yelling. And it was just so it felt like they would argue, but they would be fine more or less, you know?
Mhm.
And so I saw that a lot. And I remember coming to the United States and going, not that I wasn't witness to as much of that. In
Yeah.
fact, I remember growing up and seeing in elementary school all my friends with siblings who hated their siblings. It was
Mm.
cool to hate your sibling. Oh my god, my brother, my sister. And I actually got along with my brother. And I remember thinking, well, maybe I should not like my brother. Maybe that would be better. So it's just sort of funny that
That's funny.
those contrasts existed.
I appreciated learning your book about sobremesa, I think is right. And that idea, and I don't know if you saw it at that time when you're that young, or if it's something you learn more about as you got older. But would you mind explaining what that is? Because I think that would have to be formative. That's along the lines of what you said.
Yes. So that was I moved to the States when I was 6,
Yeah.
and as I was growing up, between the ages of 8, 10, 12, we would go down to Mexico to see the extended family, once a year or so,
Mm,
sometimes for as long as 3, 4 weeks. And we'd always have lunch at my abuelita Carolina's house. She had this big dining room table. Sobremesa is a word that exists in Spanish but does not exist in English, and it is the conversation that follows a meal.
mm,
I didn't really know that word at the time. I just
mm.
wanted to finish my lunch and get to the cartoons as quickly as I could.
Right.
But what was interesting to me is, I'd be there, I'd eat, I'd leave, and I would think, why are the adults still at the table? Why are they doing this conversation? And it would be hours, hours. And I would just get kind of, bored if there were no cousins around, just kind of walking around, making my own fun. And I would hear the laughter, and then I would hear some yelling or some awkwardness, but they would sit there, my uncles and aunts and grandparents, for so long that my grandfather would have already gone to take his siesta in his bedroom and come back, and maybe no one even noticed. And then before you know it, it's sort of time for dinner in America, right? But dinner in Mexico sort of works differently.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's people gather for a meal, but it's not about the food. It's about the
Mm,
connection.
yeah.
And they start talking and they link up about their problems and about their concerns and about their judgments of each other sometimes and about the
Mm,
funny things in life. And that's how the relationships build.
yeah. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful idea. A question you like to ask people, is my understanding, is when you're interviewing them, is the why you. Right? And so I'm interested, why do you like that question as a journalist? And then how about the book? Why you in this
Mm.
book?
Yeah, as a journalist, it is one of my favorite questions. It's instead of getting into this rote place where I go to someone who has done something newsworthy for their community, whatever it may be, and just say, okay, I'm just here to get the details, go through a checklist, and go home. People are so interesting and we're so full of mystery. And if someone has led their community in an interesting way or started some kind of subculture or whatever they're doing that stands out enough for me to meet them, I want to know, why did you do this and
Mhm.
not somebody else? So I
Yeah.
so I look at the thing,
Yeah.
it could be anything. There's somebody I interviewed, this is silly, but like the head of a Vespa club in Seattle who like put in a ton of time into this Vespa club.
Yeah.
What? Like why?
Right.
How? Right?
There's got to be a great
How
story there, right?
yeah, like how
Yeah.
much do you have to love these strange Italian scooter things? And how do
Right.
you even fall in love with a strange Italian scooter thing from all
Yeah.
the way out here in Seattle?
Right.
How did that happen? And so I just want to know, why you and not somebody else? Because even if you tell me, well, I saw a Vespa once and it was awesome. Yeah, but what is it about you that made
Mm,
that the spark that started an obsession?
that's a story.
You know, who are you? It's another way of saying, who are you? Not just
Mhm.
I'm here for what you do or what you believe. Who are you that animates and informs who you are and what you believe and what you do?
Mhm. That's good. So, in many respects, why you for this book, in many respects, it has to do with your background and your experiences leading up to this point. I mean, you're ideal to write this book in many ways, right? But you also said you don't do this for fun. Like you don't build bridges or try to help people. You don't do it for fun, right? So
Mhm.
would you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I really do care. I um Ever since I was little and I would look around, you grow up, you go to kindergarten, you go to elementary school, you learn that the world is a pretty tricky place, that there's a lot of
Mhm.
problems. There's problems everywhere. And for me, from a very early age, I'm not sure why, but the thing that really stuck out to me is just people aren't understanding each other. And maybe this was informed by I watched a lot of movies growing up, and there I talk a little bit about this in the
Yeah.
book. I thought it was normal to go to the movie theater once a week. Not normal. Turns out, not normal. To see Jurassic Park 4 times in the movie theater in May of 1993. Not normal. But there's something about fiction and the stories we tell that shows this about humans, that we're imperfect and we need to hear certain stories over and over again.
I'm just intrigued by how you seem uniquely um, wired up, perhaps, and the passion you have to write this book. Like there are people that are, I don't know. I'm intrigued by this. Why you for the
Right,
book? I
right,
guess. Yeah.
right. So it's yeah, it's a combination of I really feel like a lot of the problems are because we don't understand each other. And then I think going to the movies and a lot of fiction has taught me that everybody has their reasons.
Hmm.
Everybody has their reasons. So when we say things like, they're crazy. This is like they're dumb, they're being stupid, or they're horrible people. It's never true. It's just isn't.
Hmm.
Even in movies,
Yeah.
where there's a villain, okay, yes, there's a cartoonish villain. Lex Luthor is out to dominate the world. Um, he has his reasons. You can totally disagree, but there's always, even in like the most cartoonish caricatures of these things, which do not reflect real conflicts, you can see, the bad guy has that moment before the hero finally gets untied from its shackles and like
Mhm.
saves the day, where the villain explains the deep dark plot.
Yeah.
Like, this is my maha, and pretty soon, maha, and you're sitting there as a viewer going, oh yeah, I see how that links up.
Yeah.
This person thinks it's somehow good because they're seeking power or because of whatever. Again, very cartoonish example, but even in that extreme, right? Everybody has their reasons. The question is, do you know them? Are you open to them?
Yeah, that's
And
good.
when you think you know people's reasons, you probably don't, especially if you haven't talked with them or if you haven't checked your assumptions with the reality.
I was expecting a Star Trek story out of you already, but
Oh,
because you
oh,
said in
we
the
can get
book,
there.
yeah, okay, good. Just double checking, yeah. So it's easy to see polarization in the political realm, right? There's no question about that. And by the way, anyone listening to us, the book can help if you are concerned about you have to face some relatives with different views at an upcoming gathering.
Oh,
Read
yeah.
the book; it really will help you. But there's us versus thems in organizations as well, right? There's engineering versus sales, or the old guard versus Gen Z. A woman in the Air Force, she told me that there's the pilots versus the non-pilots. In higher ed, there's the PhDs and the so you're not, huh?
Hmm.
So here's what I'm wondering: after you introduce what sorting is, I'd love your kind of like take on that. I'd also love your take on what are the upsides to our
Mm.
tendencies to sort, right? Because it's easy
Hmm.
to talk about the downsides. What are some upsides, and can there be an us without a them? I'd be
Yeah.
interested in your take on that.
Yeah. So sorting is the very natural human tendency to want to be around people who are like you.
Yeah,
It's comfortable. It's how we make friends. That's the way we make
that's a good
friends.
point. Yeah.
Speaking of an upside, it's it's how we build belonging and purpose and meaning. Is you find your people. That's totally normal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it can get it is part of what I call the SOS, which is sort of this trio of forces: sorting, othering, and siloing, that I believe in a deep way has led us to the toxic polarization that gets in our way in so many ways. But sorting is largely good.
Mm.
Like, it's we can't get rid of it, and we shouldn't, because we seek connection. We are social creatures through and through. We've evolved that way, and when we build communities, we it's more than the sum of our parts. Really incredible things happen when we feel connected to other people. The question you asked, which is a profound one for me, can there be an us without a them? I haven't answered all the way,
Mm.
because that's what tends to happen. One of the easiest ways to build a sense of belonging among one group is to know what the other groups are. Know who you're not. Make your boundaries. It can be a lot of fun. In sports, we see it all the time, right? There's characteristics of your team versus another team. Rivalries are fun to get into. And actually, like, kind of throwing shade at the other side is how you celebrate who you are and what you're rooting for. So that's normal. It can be good. It's how you release tension. In the political realm, I think about all the times after the 2016 election. I'm liberal myself, as I very openly say in the book, and I live in Seattle, a very democratic place. And I could see that even when people were, to my mind, saying, pretty awful things about the other side. And this is the dark side of sorting. You're not exposed to real human beings, who are good and who you love, who may believe these things. And so it's easier to vilify them. But even then, I could see that there was a bonding that was happening. Like, it wasn't
Mhm.
right to say all those things and pronounce those judgments that are just beyond reality, but I know where it's coming from and I see the bonding that's coming as a result. And this is one of the things that we do when we are in different groups. In Seattle, when I was first a journalist here, I remember learning about an event called Critical Mass.
Mm,
Critical Mass is once a month in Seattle, and I don't think it happens at the same level anymore.
mm.
All the cyclists in Seattle
Ah,
would just be like this one big like swarm, and they would take over downtown, and the people who drive just were so annoyed by it because they'd hold up traffic and they didn't seem to care. And it and the cyclists were like, yeah, this is how we show up, and we're also going to
we own
advocate
the
for more
roads
bike
too.
lanes. Yeah. And so that was a way that they showed up. It's just like, stick it to the drivers, we're going to take over the streets once a month, that kind of thing. And it's a beautiful biking community, but that was an annoying day for drivers. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
these there are upsides. You make friends, you build belonging, you know who you are by knowing who you are not. This is the way
Mhm.
identity works.
Yeah. When I started my business, Monty, somebody told me a business always does better if you know who the enemy is. And I never,
Mm.
that just never felt right, quite right to me.
Mhm.
Like, does there have to be an us versus them? But you can kind of see that there is kind of that in the real world. So the way I took it from the book is when it leads to othering.
Yeah.
Okay? When it moves towards an othering, as you call it, where we put them off, right? That in a way that matters. It's not just that they're not a Seattle Seahawk. It's just that all of a sudden like I come from Chicago, it's a big
Mhm.
sports town, and I don't really follow professional sports that closely, but I've heard people like get into fights in the stands. So it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a whole nother sort of thing there, right? So that's kind of what
Yeah.
the othering idea is.
Absolutely. There's a natural superior inferior thing that we do. Whatever we are is superior. Of
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
Of
Of
course.
course,
Either
of
I
course.
chose it or I am it, but it's great. And whatever is different, there's different and then there's less than, right?
Mm,
And so
mm,
othering is putting distance between ourselves and those we deem too different. But what we've seen is that often that difference, even if it's not meaningful, the research shows we will begin to discriminate in small ways. There's been fascinating studies that show this, where they have experimental conditions where you can give a coin to this or that or whatever,
mm.
and we'll do stupid things just to reward our side and punish the other.
Yeah,
Stupid.
yeah.
And even when the other side, again, completely meaningless, like
Right,
you walked
completely.
into a lab and they put you in this group, guess what? You're going to trash on the other group for
Mhm,
no reason except that they're the other group. That's it.
mhm. Yeah,
So that's scary because you see the roots of some of the deepest sins in humanity happen when we decide that other people are not as worthy as we are of
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah. Well said. One of your deepest personal convictions is that understanding the people who confound us is always worth it. And
Mhm.
in the introduction, I asked our listeners to think of two people: someone in their personal life that they'd rather not, run into at a family or social gathering, and then someone who drives them crazy at work that
Mhm.
confounds them. So, the next time they see a social media post from them or hear them spout out their perspective that we don't agree with, you encourage us to stay curious, not to write them
Mhm.
off, but stay curious. And a key question to that is, what am I missing? I can't tell you the number of times I've been thinking that since reading your book. What am I missing? So, what do we normally ask instead of that? And why is
Mhm.
this what am I missing thing not just any question, but the
Mhm.
question in many ways?
Yeah. So, what we often ask instead of what am I missing, instead of humbly checking our own knowledge, is something like, what's wrong with you? you know? And what's wrong with you is a question that turns our extraordinary capacity for knowledge building, right? Curiosity is called the knowledge emotion. It's a craving for knowledge. We can do incredible things if we really want to know something. What is wrong with you? Gets us to sit and dwell in our judgments. Oh, it's because he's this or that. Did you see how he did that? Oh my
Mhm.
god. Come home and tell your partner or your friends like, "Oh, this person, right? Like, ah."
Yeah.
Um what's wrong with them? Well, let me count the ways. Let me count all the things that are wrong with them.
Yeah.
There's a couple folks in my work life who, one comes to mind in particular, really difficult, interactions, clash of styles, some bad days. And in the intervening years, I've realized I learned so much. I had to learn so much because they were so different. And
Yeah.
some lessons I didn't learn soon enough. Um,
Mm,
but but part of what happens when you ask, what am I missing? And what's what's bugging you is somebody else, and you want them to change so much, is you end up having to get curious about how you're implicated in
mm,
what's a tough relationship, or how do you treat them, not
mm,
just how they treat you.
mm.
And that's uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable. But and I didn't go that much into it in the book, but curiosity is a lot more effective external from yourself if you
Mm,
make it effective internally. So if you
mm,
if you
that's
are if you are checking your own knowledge, if you're saying, wait, do I have everything I need to know for this? What am I missing? I'm missing something. And it begins with that assumption that other people are not crazy, stupid, or evil.
yeah.
Not your coworker, not anybody else. They are different.
Mm.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes maybe that person just needs to get fired. That, yes.
Right.
Like,
Maybe,
sure.
maybe so.
You know, but less often than we'd think. And if we ask, what am I missing? We can try to turn those opportunities where we would normally judge into opportunities to try to understand, or to clear the air, or to say, hey,
Mm,
I need to have a conversation with you. This is the pattern. And then this is what I've observed, and this is the conclusion I draw.
mm. Yeah, and just
Is that
and
right? Like,
oh,
tell
yeah,
me what's
right.
going on,
Yeah, and so you can air it out because it could be just a story that you're saying, but at least you air it out as opposed to just hold this. To me, it feels like if a way that I interpret it as you're saying this is, it's giving them the benefit of the doubt, which we often don't give the benefit of the doubt when we other. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because when we other, again, we think people are just not worth they're not worthy. They're
Hmm.
not worthy of our concern, of our goodwill. We've already written them off. We already there's a real disdain that comes from certainty about people we don't know. It does not make sense to draw conclusions about people we don't know. People are very mysterious. You can read a thought piece online with some statistics, but if you then make the conclusion, everyone who is this must be that, that's
Hmm.
on you, yo. That doesn't even make sense.
Hmm.
And we know this from a lot of wonderful conversations about, you know, diversity of various sorts, that we get tricked. We trick ourselves. We get pretty blind about these things, and it does become the root of some pretty nasty stuff that we do to each other.
Yeah. I'm even thinking money is like if I come home from a business trip or, finish, speaking for the day and my wife, Sarah, we're almost married 35 years, almost
Nice.
35 years. So we know each other really, really, we've got a really good relationship. But let's say she says something and inside I might be thinking, what's the big deal? I've learned, by the way, free relationship advice. That's a bad thing to say. What's the big deal? But,
Yeah.
but wouldn't it be so much better if even in our personal, most intimate relationships, we said things like, wait, what am I missing?
Yeah.
Like, don't even jump to a conclusion that it's not even just a random person on Instagram. It is our child or these other people. Like, what are we missing? There's got to be something there. It's given the benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love is, you mentioned Amanda Ripley's been on this podcast, and she talks about this very effective technique where, you feel like something's off,
Hmm.
and someone's trying to explain something to you and you're not getting it. You can say it back to them. You can say, okay, so what I hear you saying is this. So my understanding then is this.
Hmm.
Is that right? Because it leads me to this impression. And then people get like, no, that's not what I meant. Or, well, what also matters is this other thing. Oh, okay. So that's a way that you can fill in those holes with people.
Hmm.
Um, I think sometimes we feel a little ashamed to be in the to admit that we're in the dark about something.
That's a good
So,
point.
there's a sense of strength and confidence means not asking any questions. You talk to me, you said things fine. I understand. We watch movies and TV shows and they never go, sorry, come again. They never do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sometimes we need to do that, because we don't understand, and we should make sure we understand each other.
I feel like Amanda's "Tell Me More" and yours, "What Am I Missing?" I feel like those that combination in conversations. In fact, actually, your book is I feel like a masterclass on conversations. You have your 5 dials on
Hmm.
the conversation dial, and I want people to read the book to get all 5, so let's not hit. But I'd love for you to go a bit deeper on 2 of them if you'd be up for it,
Hmm.
because I don't think they get enough focus. Parity and containment. So I'd
Yeah.
love, how do you explain those, and what should we keep in mind if we want to have better conversations across the divide with those two?
Yeah. So there are these five conditions for conversation, kind of a context where you can check and make sure, is the water even warm here? Should I jump in to try to do something a little difficult across a misunderstanding or disagreement? Containment is the degree to which a conversation is contained to the people actually participating in it,
Yeah.
which would be laughable 100 years ago. But today,
Right. Good point.
we have social media. We have, group texts. I mean, we have open wall, open things where people are listening and we have no idea how many people are really listening and we don't get to see them or witness their listening. And so it leaves us to make assumptions about how they'd be listening. Basically adds up to the less contained your conversation to the people actually participating in it, the more that people will perform their perspectives instead of explore their perspectives. They just don't feel secure, and why would you? Because it's like a panopticon. You don't know who's listening. What if they come bite you the next day? You don't get to see the feedback. It's so inorganic that way.
Yeah.
So that's super important. And it also affects the candor that people can bring to
Mhm.
their conversation. So if you ask on Facebook, on Instagram, and it's wide open, and you ask someone to explain themselves on something sensitive, why, what we want ideally is to be honest with each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
And sometimes that means saying things that are difficult to say or sound bad at first, but bear with me. That's
Mhm.
really hard to do in some of these
Mhm.
spaces where we talk to each other. So
Yeah.
it's really important that when we are having these conversations, we try to get as close as we can to something like a one-on-one,
Mhm.
because that's where people can feel that they can really be honest, and that's where trust can build in that space, that contained space between you. It does mean that, well, you can't scale this very much. No, you can't. But that's human relationships. You
Mhm.
can't scale them. And you do need a baseline of trust. And the
Mhm.
other one you mentioned is parity, which is
Parody.
not the funny kind. It's
Mhm. Yeah, right.
it's the platform power kind. And I want to make a distinction here between, a lot of folks, especially on the left, this is a big conversation about power.
Mhm.
Maybe you're part of what is considered by many to be a marginalized community. You have history you're carrying, to the conversation, and it burdens you.
Oppressors and oppressed and things like
Right.
that. Power, yeah.
So that's not what I'm talking about. That's a
Mhm.
separate thing. I'm talking about parity, parity, in the sense of your relative standing on the platform. So if I'm at a live lecture
Mhm.
and I'm on stage and you're asking a question at the microphone, who has more power? Well, the
Mhm.
person on
Right.
stage, right?
Right.
If I'm on Facebook and I'm posting on Facebook and you're commenting on my Facebook post, I can hide your comment, I can block your comment, and I have spent who knows how long sculpting my followership to be folks maybe who just agree with me all the time and would make you feel very unwelcome indeed. So
Yeah.
it's that sort of thing. It's parody. And again, you want to try, if you are having a tough conversation, don't put people in a place where they don't feel, you don't want to be in a place where you don't feel fully open, and you don't want
Mhm.
them in that place either, because again, you will not be honest. You will
Yeah.
perform instead of explore. You will do all
Mhm.
these things that will take you away from each other when what you're trying to do is get closer.
Somebody told me, and the way I interpret it was, they would have meetings, their boss would have meetings in the boss's office, and right behind his desk was like this giant picture of a pit bull. And so, like, if you're having this conversation, all you see is boss and pit bull. There's no
Wow.
parity in this conversation. You're in the boss's office, intimidating environment, where if we really were interested in having a conversation, maybe go into a coffee shop, right? That would be a
Yeah,
different
neutral
parity.
ground.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah.
And I know that we're thinking too about workplace
Yeah.
divides, and
Yeah.
it is tricky because in the workplace there is absolutely, most
There's
workplaces have
authority.
hierarchies.
Yeah. Right.
Those hierarchies mean something. There
Mhm.
is authority. So
Mhm.
the onus is much more formally on those who are managers to
Mhm.
set the tone of curiosity for others. And it is much harder to do it from below. It's not impossible, but yeah, it's harder to feel secure sharing your real opinion if your manager is someone who seems very certain or ready to pounce or wants to win instead of making sure that you're making the best decision as a team. These things can be tough for managers to embrace, for sure.
Mhm.
It means kind of confronting your own ego sometimes, but
Yeah.
but better products,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
better everything you're doing at work will be
Yeah.
better if you
Yeah.
can do it.
I saw it early in my career where people acted differently if their boss was on copy than if the boss wasn't on copy, right?
Oh yeah.
And so
Right.
that's an example of containment,
Yeah.
and I'd never seen it said quite the way you did in the book about, just like you said here, they perform instead of explore. And
Yeah.
so we might think, well, why'd they act that way? Well, I set it up by not
Yeah.
thinking about containment. So I need to think about that dial. And I mean, these are only two of the five. So when people read the book, they'll get more of it. But just really thinking it through of, am I given the time? And like all these, I love the idea of thinking of it as a dial too. It's not a switch on or off. It's, it's like a fader, it's like, which ones are necessary here?
Exactly. And things like Slack at work,
Hmm.
when a disagreement starts on an open Slack channel, there's steps you can make. You turn up the dial by moving it to a direct message. You
Hmm.
you've driven up containment. But then you can drive up other things like embodiment by actually getting together, having coffee, bringing your gestures into it. The little laughs that come out in live conversation. You can't laugh on Slack the same way. You can say LOL, but look, like you and I have laughed, if we go back and count it, 30 times, little laughs. Ha ha, ha ha.
Hmm.
And those release tension
Yeah.
and build some glue. And you can't do LOLs like that all the time. And
Yeah.
so people default on social media and text-based platforms to reading the other person in a voice they make up and in a voice that reflects their insecurities about what's being said, instead of the real voice the other person is actually intending to use.
Yeah. I love the Brene Brown quote that says something like, in the absence of data, we always make up stories. And that's kind of along
Exactly.
those lines, right? In the absence of a richer medium, in the absence of enough time, in the absence of containment or parity, or, we just make up stories, which kind of remind me also of a quote you have in the book. I'd love your thought on this of,
Mhm.
people aren't puzzles, they are
Mhm.
mysteries. And why is that distinction important as we try to bridge divides?
Yeah, so this comes from author Ian Leslie, who wrote a book about curiosity. It's really good. And he talks about puzzles being, if you imagine a jigsaw puzzle, the framework, the shape, you know what it's supposed to look like. You just have to find the missing piece.
Mm,
So you know what it's built on. You know the scaffolding. You know the baseline, the foundation is there. You just need to go find the missing piece. So that's it. You find the missing piece. You found it. You're done. A mystery doesn't work that way. There's lots of layers. You don't ever really know if you even have the outline you're supposed to be filling in.
yeah.
It's probably got multiple dimensions to it. You don't know. And usually when you find some answer, it only unlocks more questions.
Mm,
That's people. So when we treat people as if they were puzzles, we fall into the trap of certainty yet again. And this is what happens a lot across the political divide, because we'll be anxious, but it happens at work as well. When we're starting to judge someone else at work, that team's got it out for me, that person doesn't respect me.
mm.
Then, without data, we'll make up stories, as Brene Brown says. These people are puzzles. What's wrong with them? Let me figure it out. I already know. I can figure it out. But there could be all kinds of things going on. Maybe
Mm.
they genuinely are having a bad day. Maybe there's
Right.
family
Right.
issues going on. Maybe that helps explain some of the behaviors. So understanding that about people is a lifelong thing, I'm sure, and I don't think anyone gets to the bottom of it. But I think about, I've been married to my husband 12 years. We're still talking. How could we
Yeah.
still have things to find out about each other? Well,
Right.
because we really are bottomless. There's no end to it. So whenever people get to reading some thought piece again on the internet about those other people who voted a different way, right? The temptation is to say, aha, I figured it out. I'm anxious, I'm tense, I'm scared. So what happens? It's something social scientists call NFC. I have a
Mm.
need for closure. So I
That's
will
me.
find the first answer I can grip, and
Mhm.
then just say, haha, I'm done. I know why they think the way they think. I can move on. We treat people like puzzles when we do that, and it's not accurate. It's not honest.
Yeah. I feel like, and I don't know if this is just part of getting older, but I feel, and I'm actually not, because I've seen older people where the trend is different, but I feel like I'm getting less satisfied with simple answers to complex problems. And I guess it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be that way, right? You could get older and more ossified and just say like, this is as simple as the world is. But I think your book gives us permission to be, it's not only good to not settle for simple answers, it's actually bad if we do. Like
Absolutely.
try to catch when we're doing that, right?
Yes, definitely. And
Yeah.
and it is hard. And look, like we can't expect that of ourselves on every issue all of the
Mhm.
time. I think
Yeah.
one of the defining I think historians are going to look back at this time. Hopefully we'll get out of this, but look back at this time as a time when people were, you know, scared and busy
Mhm.
and tired.
Yeah. Mm.
And when you're scared and busy and tired, you feel scarce.
Mhm.
You don't feel like there's a lot of you to be given, and it's hard to be creative, it's hard to be collaborative, it's hard to be open.
Mhm.
So yeah, plus there's this ridiculous expectation in some spaces out there that you're supposed to have an opinion about everything and that you're a
Right.
bad person if you don't.
Right.
And that's ludicrous. Like
Yeah.
the pressure we're putting on each other that some of us are putting on others,
Yeah.
you know, you have to care about what I care about as much as I care about it, or
Mhm.
I can't handle you anymore. Like,
Or because an actor or a athlete says something like they're supposed to be an expert on international affairs or whatever.
I mean, who knows, right? But
Right.
we're out there kind of finding, validation for our ideas, sometimes getting really hopped up on something. We're sorting ourselves into these groups and we find the belonging and a sense of righteousness, with these folks. So then everybody else looks like devils. And these things are
Mhm.
happening so frequently on so many frequencies, that it's really hard to track. It's hard for any of us to keep up with. Recently in my own personal life, I've been taking like bigger steps than I ever have to try
Mhm.
to recapture my attention and try to
Mhm.
be proactive about what stimulates my thinking.
Mhm.
Because really, what we do is about what we think, not
Mhm.
about what is.
Yeah.
There's a quote from the Talmud, I think, that, things are not as they are, things are as we are.
Mm.
So it's all about what's going on in here. That
Yeah.
determines more about how you see the world than anything else.
That's well said. And like in the introduction, I talked about the person we don't want to see, right? Social gathering or the other side of the business. Do you think it's fair to say we can't not make assumptions about them? Like, there's that. It's kind of like that sorting default we have. We make assumptions. But can you think of an example of how your assumption assistant recently tried to steer you wrong, and how
Oh,
you
yeah.
try to overcome that now as you learn about this?
Yeah, no, it happens a lot. And one really interesting example for me happened, it was very illuminating when I was in Ohio and there for a book tour type stop last year.
Mhm.
And the moderator of a book talk was a conservative, man who is wonderful. And we went out to dinner after the talk. And early on in the dinner, he talked about his frustration at his brother who had converted to fundamentalist Christianity. And so when
Mm.
he said
Mm.
that, and he said it in sort of like, oh, there was a frustration there, I made an assumption. I made an assumption that he thinks fundamentalist Christianity is bad somehow.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
cool. And then as the conversation went on, I realized, wait, he is also fundamentalist Christian. Oh, like he
Right.
is a fundamentalist Christian. He doesn't think it's wrong. And so there was this funny moment in the conversation where I realized that I had made that error in my reactions and everything I was saying. And so I told him, I'm sorry. I just want to tell you, I think I've been assuming this whole time that that like you thought fundamentalist Christianity was like a bad thing in your brother. And I'm now realizing, no, you are fundamentalist. And he goes, yeah, I've been dropping hints all this time waiting for you to pick up on that. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And we had a conversation about it. I'm very secular. I live in a very secular place. The word fundamentalist for me tends to have negative connotations
Mm.
wherever
Mm.
it's used.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was easy for me to hear that, even though what he meant was that he and his others in his family were just concerned about how quickly his brother had converted.
Mm.
Um, when he had come
Interesting.
from somewhere else, it had nothing to do. Like he's a fundamentalist Christian and a proud one and a scientist, and he's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So there went my religious bias,
Mm.
directing, and a religious bias I wasn't even conscious of. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to be biased against any
No,
religion.
no, 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 for
And so I
sure.
learned more about fundamentalist Christianity from him,
Yeah.
and I knew nothing. I knew nothing.
Yeah. Do I remember you called like almost like an assumption change? So you could have assumed the fact that he was more conservative. Well, of course, he's religious. And if he's religious, he
Mhm.
probably thinks this. And because he thinks that, like we have this assumption change sometimes and no data to support it at
No
all.
data. No
Yeah.
data, just filling in the blanks, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe I expected him to be I usually hear people talk about themselves as Christian. I more rarely hear the full label
Mm,
fundamentalist Christian, which he
mm,
uses proudly, right?
mhm.
And I'm just not I don't live in those worlds. Many Americans do. And
Yeah.
they would be far more confounded by a more secular culture like Seattle, where it's hard to find a church. Like, where are the
Right.
churches? I don't know. They're
Yeah.
hidden
It's
somewhere.
it's so
So,
good. It's a good example of how words can be interpreted differently, and we might think we have facts with the words, but we're making assumptions even with the words. You know.
all
So
the
yeah,
time, all the
yeah,
time.
that's a
It's
good
the one
example.
way that I almost wish that we could be more like robots, because robots, if they have no data, they leave it blank. They
Yeah,
leave it blank. We
yeah,
cannot do that. So to your
yeah.
question, we will always make assumptions. We
Hmm.
can't prevent thoughts from coming to our minds. What we
Yeah,
can do is try to notice them.
yeah,
Because once you notice them, now you have control. Now you have choices. But
yeah,
if you don't notice them, your thoughts influence behaviors in ways that are invisible to you.
yeah. That's why I like your picture of the assumption assistant.
Mhm.
That it almost makes it like, well, wait a minute, I can tell that person to shut up, or like
Right.
it's not me, it's the assistant. I don't. There's
It's the
something about
assistant. Mhm.
depersonalizing that I think is really powerful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it does feel like just you. It just feels like your observation. And, like sorting, there's a lot of good things about making assumptions. That's why we do it. We've evolved all these things because they serve us.
Hmm.
We make assumptions because it's impossible to stop and get all the data about everything all of the time.
Yeah, yeah,
We can't do that. We wouldn't be able to function. Some things we have to assume,
yeah.
but some things when we assume lead us somewhere really bad, and
Mhm.
to be conscious enough to notice that is can be pretty tough.
Yeah, but
And again, we
powerful
have
if
to
we
kind of
do.
choose, and we have to be forgiving.
Mhm. Let's say someone listening to us has a strong opinion on a social issue. I'm not saying which side, but let's say they have that, and
Mhm.
in fact, let's say it's about something about the role of equity and inclusion in the workplace, because
Mm,
a big thing,
yeah.
importantly so. But they have to work with someone who feels differently about what those words mean and how such policies are being implemented.
Mm.
So before we talk about how to navigate potential discussion about that, I'd first like to ask you this: like, do people choose their opinions?
Ah,
And if so
yeah,
or not, what are the implications of
yeah.
whether they choose or not?
I used to assume people chose their opinions because I never really thought about it
Yeah.
until I heard a philosopher who became a pal, who I write about in the book,
Mhm.
say that we absolutely do not choose our opinions, that our opinions are the result of our experiences. And he later told me over drinks, that that our opinions sort of like they grow like flowers in the yard, and there
Mhm.
they are. And we don't choose them. So you mentioned a Star Trek story, and the one that I think of here
Yeah.
is I grew up on Star Trek, The Next Generation. I would watch it with my family every Wednesday night, and then Voyager as well. And it was everything to us. And it taught me so much about humanity. Like, The Next Generation's all about ethics. It's so cool. I thought Star Wars was like fine, whatever. My husband, on the other hand, uh, does have as a gift from his grandmother this life-size Yoda that we must display,
Of
whether I
course.
like it or not, somewhere in our house. And it's a little creepy in the wrong light. But he watched, the three prequels as a kid with his parents several times, and he
Mhm.
knows all about that universe. It doesn't matter how much I try to change his mind to think that Star Trek is better than Star Wars. It's never going to happen. His experiences with Star Wars, how much it means to him, goes all the way through his biography. That's got deep roots. So we tend to think, and again, spaces like social media don't help with this, that with some mic drop argument or some little meme, some reason that we think is really strong, and I just have to hand this reason to you and it will change your mind. No, that's not how this works. The opinions don't carry that much power. The ideas and reasons don't carry that much power. It's our biographies. It's who we are and what we've lived and how it tunes us into certain frequencies more than others. That's so we don't choose our opinions. We can't just decide to become a Democrat tomorrow if I'm a Republican today. That's not how that works.
Mm.
And we act as if that's how that works.
Yeah. I mean, I got to believe there's pushback with people who are just hearing this for the first time. So they got to get the book to kind of get more of this. But the line in that section that like smacked me upside the head was, which do you value more, the truth or your own beliefs? And so the idea that my opinion is not a final answer. It's just where I'm at now. And if someone feels differently, it could be their lived experience has caused this more than what they realize and more than I realize where they're at. So
Yeah.
they could choose to change parties. I mean, that happens, but it's one of those things that it's more of a process. At least that's what I interpreted it.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And realizing this gives us, I think, a lot of power to
Mm,
approach people who have ideas that we otherwise would be scared of. Because what
mhm,
it means is, and I've noticed this about folks, I think people are kind of scared that
mm.
if they talk to someone who holds ideas they find unsavory, what if they're convinced?
Right.
What if they will turn into monsters too? You know,
Yeah.
which is a
Yeah.
lot of problems with that assumption. But 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 it's just not that easy, yo. It's
Uh,
not that easy.
well,
You know,
you actually gave that
if
story of someone who's concerned about going to AA.
right, right. And she
Right?
was afraid that she
Yeah.
would go and something would change in her, that her family would no longer accept
Right.
her because she would
Right.
believe in a higher power and this whole
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
And it just wasn't the case at all. It didn't
Yeah.
it didn't follow that track at all.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, but with opinions, if you change your mind in the course of one conversation because you hear ideas in a new way, it's because your mind was fertile ground for that idea already.
Yeah. Right.
Not because that idea had some insurmountable superpower to change you overnight. You were already at the fence of that, you know?
Hmm. That's a good
And
way to say it.
that's the natural way that our opinions evolve as we creep closer and away from certain things. And
Mhm.
there's no way to tell from the outside. It's invisible and it's inside us. So the only way we can explore these things about each other is to really talk about them.
Yeah. So we're not going to do any formal role play on how to talk to this person who differs us on equity inclusion, but one thing I
Mhm.
got from the book, and I think it's pretty safe to say, this is not about, you can't have a conversation about winning. It's got to be about understanding, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like if I'm going to try to bridge this divide, I have to be like, I want to understand them, not try to get them to change their opinion. So um, what would be just a couple of your favorite traction loop tips that might
Mhm.
help us as we think about having a conversation in the workplace about
Mhm.
something that we differ about?
Yeah. So one thing that is super helpful is to get people to tell you how they came to believe something
Yeah.
rather than why.
Hmm.
And why is really tempting. It's a great question. There's nothing wrong with the question why. It's just that when you ask that across a bigger divide where there's distrust, where there might be some suspicion, this happens a lot in the workplace. People feel like they need to justify and defend themselves as the priority one, you know. They're not going to say something to help you understand their position. They're going to try to justify why they're right, and that's
Hmm.
it. And so also what'll happen is they'll tend to go toward what feel like the safe arguments first,
Hmm.
whatever they've seen, out there said already. And so you'll end up having kind of proxy wars, or you'll say the same things over and over again, and you won't get to what's really going on. So if instead you say, how, so, DEI, it's been, as you know, like a little tough for me to accept how it's been being implemented, but I know that you're a big fan. So I just want to understand, like, how did you come to like, as you said earlier today, that to like the training that we did today? Like, how did you come to believe that's a good thing for our office? Because I'm struggling and I'd love to understand.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
that will go differently than, why do you like this?
Right.
Like,
What's wrong
what
with
is
you is
going
what your body
on?
language is. Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you like it? And then I can follow that with, because this is all the reasons I think it sucks.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it gets people to tell a story instead of
Yeah.
feel like they're on trial, which again moves us toward exploring instead of performing.
Hmm.
So that's a good one for me.
That's good. Yeah. I like your comment also in that section about listen a little bit longer. Like instead of commenting, ask one more question. Like
Oh,
right when you're ready to inject your one more question, at least
yes.
that. And find the points we agree with, because there's probably more agreement than what we think.
Yep.
Yeah. Far more of that. But
I use that one all the time because
mm,
I like to talk
yeah.
and and I like to jump in with my opinion.
Mhm.
Um, but I do make myself do that. Like, oh, time for me to come in, and I go, no, no, no. Ask one more curious question, not a gotcha
Mm,
question, not a
mhm.
statement disguised as a question, an actual question where you're trying to learn more.
Yeah.
And what's good about that is curiosity works on the material you give it, right? So if
Mm.
you only hear somebody else, you ask them a question and you hear them for 10 seconds, that's not going to give you a lot of material to, inform and illuminate the next question you could ask. It's not going to reveal that many gaps. So you've got to give people time. I have this exercise I'm kind of toying with that I think of as just like give them 5 minutes. And I've done this in some workshops that I've done where it's remarkable when you instruct like a bunch of folks in these series of exercises to practice curiosity, to just listen to the other person about their opinion for 5 minutes without interrupting. You just ask questions, that's it, but you don't give your opinion, you don't give any judgment. It's nuts how much they learn, and it's 5 minutes. So
5
it's
stinking
just
minutes.
so unusual,
Yeah.
for us to maintain a posture of non-judgmental listening for that
Mhm.
long.
Yeah. There's so many things I'd love to talk with you about, but let's end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. Can you think of any ways that you and your husband have to like use these ideas as a parent or try to develop them in your two kids?
Yeah, trying to develop them is interesting. One thing is when I hear, but my kids are 10 and 8 years old, and when I hear them give judgments about anything,
Mhm.
I try to find a way to ask, "Are you sure?"
Mhm.
Or, "Well, tell me more about that. What have you
Mhm.
observed that makes you think that?" And then what else could be going on? Which is another way of saying what are you missing? So that's been neat. It's just trying
Mhm.
to, whenever they uh describe what feels like a narrow world, I go in and I just try to, mom's here to just pull it open a little bit. Just stretch out the boundaries of what you've got. So
Yeah.
so that's one way. There's kids make a lot of judgments, especially about each other, right? And
Right.
then
Yeah.
gosh, there's no better model for, the ways that we attack each other than to watch my two kids get into sibling, spats. It's
Mhm.
he did it first. He did it worse. And you realize, wait, whoever did it first or whoever did it worse becomes an endless barrier to making any
Mhm.
progress. And we do it as
Mhm.
adults.
Yeah.
The
Right.
Republicans and the Democrats, they did it first. Well, they did it worse. And then we're stuck in that loop. And in the way, it's like if you take a big, big step back, like, y'all, what matters is what we do next.
Mhm.
And we're not going to get to that conversation if we're still arguing about he did it bad, they did it worse, they did it first. They're never going to acknowledge that because they lose dignity. They're not going to acknowledge that. So stop asking. Like, get past that. Um yeah, it's the family is it's yeah, every day.
It's a great breeding ground for all of these ideas. Because, for example, I won't say this haunts me as a dad. We've got 5 kids,
Mhm.
3 of them out of the house now, 2, youngest 2 are 13 and 12, but
Nice.
they're listening to the dinner conversations, right? And so the way we talk about others, the way we talk about politics, the way we talk about the news of the day, the way we talk about neighbors, um,
Yeah.
they're watching, right? And so it kind of doesn't matter what I teach them necessarily, right? I mean, we know that. So it is worth thinking through. Are we modeling the simple answers or are we modeling mysteries? You know?
Exactly. Yeah, that's very well put. I think that's
Yeah.
spot on.
Well, for those listening, this is a book I consider a must read. Get a copy of Monica Guzman's book. I never thought of it that way. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for the cast. So, Monica, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much. This has been a blast.